it reminds me of this meme thing I saw a couple days ago that said, no one wants to hear your opinion. They want to hear their opinion come out of your mouth. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. And I will tell you, as you well know, but for our listeners' sake, usually when we talk about the episode, we'll say, do you have a story? And we'll kind of go back and forth. Yeah, I think I have one. What about you? What do you want to do the episode on? And in this one, I said, no, we're talking about this. This is
You
the
did.
story
You
that I
were
want
very
to talk
definitive, which both in one fell swoop made me very happy and a tiny bit nervous. Not that we met them ahead of time. I don't always know what your story was, but your definitiveness, I'm not sure which way my dial should run on that.
So this really, we've had some conversations, you and I, about this issue, but this came in yesterday. This was from a woman that owns a franchise.
Okay.
So she's a business owner. She has a team. She owns a franchise. And she was contacted by the franchisor who reached out to her and said, hey, one of your employees posted something on social media.
Mm-hmm.
It was a comment, not a full post, but it was a comment. And I don't even know the full discussion. But the comment, paraphrased, was by this employee, believe what you want, but I will tell you that in the end, slaves had it made back then. A black man was given a job.
Wait, pause for a second. Did you just start with slaves had it made?
Had it made back then.
Wow.
A black man was given a job, shelter, and food, and they didn't complain. This generation, black people are on welfare, and it's proven that white Americans now pay taxes, which enables all black Americans to sit and live on us white people who are out working and risking their lives in some cases. So you can believe what you want.
Blah. Oh my God. So as a, this will sound completely random, but I just have to say this. So my mom never sneezes less than like 10 times. Like she's just like an ongoing sneezing. And so we learned long ago to just wait until she's done to react and say, we'll be out places and she sneezes twice and someone's like, God bless you. I'm like, don't even bother. Just wait. That was what was happening with my reaction. I'm like, my shock was coming up and then you just kept going. And I'm like, oh wait, more shock. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll just wait till he's done for the shock wave to hit. But
yeah, this is the kind of comment that you can't dismiss by saying, oh, it was taken out of context, because he doubled down on this. And so,
and tripled
down on this. But here's the thing. And I'm hoping our discussion will get to this. Believe it or not, as much of, as vile a post as it is, and it seems to be such a clear-cut issue, which is this post horrible? Yes, that's a clear-cut issue. But there is nuance here in business, and it comes from the discussions I had with this woman that was talking to me, the business owner, because obviously she wanted to know, what do I do? What can I do? And her first fear, which is the easiest to dismiss, was that if she fires this person, well, she can't fire this person because of his First Amendment rights. And I can say, no, that's not the case.
Right. That's a concern you don't have to have. Right.
That's a concern that you don't have to have, because he doesn't have a constitutional right to work at your business. And by firing him, you're not silencing him. He can continue with whatever posts he wants. You just get to say that he doesn't have the right to work at your business. He violates your core values, et cetera, et cetera.
Out of curiosity, but because I don't want to, God forbid we ever derail a conversation, but I know our state is an at-will state. And so you always have that, like, you can leave at any time, you can go. In states that aren't at-will states, or if you have some sort of employment contract, is that still the overarching, like at the level, because we haven't gotten into like HR stuff, but at the level of, you have violated my constitutional rights to free speech, does that trump all those other things? Like, even if you're not in an at-will state, or if you do have an employment agreement or some kinds of things?
If you have an employment agreement, that employment agreement may provide for different reasons for termination, a different process for termination,
Gotcha.
review, different steps.
But in general, you don't have to worry about the free speech.
In general, you do not.
Gotcha.
What matters in HR is consistency. You don't want to treat person A in identical circumstances different than you treated person B, or the person who's aggrieved is going to say, hey, we had identical circumstances. The reason you treated me differently is because I am an older worker, I am gay, I am pick a race, I am, pick a religion, etc. So you have to have a business reason for doing it. And there wasn't an employment agreement. There wasn't any reason that she couldn't let this person go.
Mm-hmm.
But she also said that, well, this isn't the first time that I've seen posts, maybe not this hateful, but posts that would be classified as hate speech on a race basis, not always posted by white against black. Sometimes it's black against white. And I can't simply say that I'm going to fire everybody unless her word was moderates, but unless they fall within particular guidelines, because I need people to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what if we talked about it? And I said, okay, but what is your goal in talking about it? Because you're not going to change.
Does she mean talk to the person about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are my options? If I talk about it, he may get offended saying this is my First Amendment right. And so that conversation will go sideways. But your goal in talking about it can't be, I'm going to show him the light and show him why he's so ignorant and wrong.
He's not going to authentically walk back the comment. And so I'd be curious what her perspective on even talking about it is. What is the ask in that talking about it, that you delete that particular post, that you don't ever post things like that? Does that mean he's not? I mean, I just don't even know what the enforceable or even clear, forget enforceable, what's the clear ask in a conversation like that?
Right. And to be clear,
stop being a despicable human.
The person posted this on his personal page, did not mention her business. His personal page doesn't have him standing there in her gear, affiliated with her brand. So what's the ask? And then you have other things. Do I mention it to other team members because his manager is black? And the fear that I had when we were talking about it is, okay, well, if you're a manager, if people on your team saw this post, because the franchisor did, so it's on a public forum. If somebody on your team saw this post and went to you and said, hey, I don't know, just pick a name, Cheryl. Hey, Cheryl, did you see this? And if so, what did you do about this?
And your answer is nothing.
And your answer is, yes, I saw it and I decided not to do anything. How comfortable are you going to be with that conversation?
Right. And oh my goodness. Okay. So I sometimes when we have these conversations, and not just when you and I have conversations, but there are often many times that it's interesting. Couple things. Wow.
Oh, that
hello.
Was
nice. Dum. Guess I forgot to turn off those sounds. So hopefully we won't get too many of those. So many issues here that I want to hit on. First of all, one thing that I do as a thought process check for myself about things is anytime, not every time, but sometimes when I have a really super crystal clear, I don't see any other answer but a straight answer, I just double check with myself by flipping the content. So for me, it's like this, there's this structural thing of like facts that happen. And then there's the story of like what was said. So I try and replace it with something that I think and I actually have a person that I think of in the world who has like the diametrically opposite view of the world than I do. Like this person sees pretty much everything the opposite of how I see it. And so I think of something that they would say that I would be super offended by. And then I have somebody on the other side that I tend to totally agree with. So something that person that I disagree with would find offensive about someone that I do agree with. And so I put that content in to see, like, do I still have the same opinion about that? Like that you can't ever. So, in that context, if I were just going to pick something random, like my totally opposite person than me would be deeply offended if somebody was, very, very strongly defending abortion rights. They would find that morally wrong and offensive.
Okay.
So if they came to me and said, this person is doing this, I just try and like replace the story and see if I still feel if I feel any differently about the decision of what I would do. And that doesn't exactly give me clarity. Frankly, it actually makes it more confusing. So I'm not sure why I like that process, but it does help me. It's sort of my own hypocrisy check, honestly. It's like because are you being, there's the moral, ethical, personal opinion thoughts about things, which are very clear. But then there's this other sort of thing about how that gets applied, because that part of what like I find moral and ethical is different with other people. So if we're saying like, yes, it is the right thing to do to choose by your morals and ethics, which at the end of the day, I think it is, but I have to be okay with other people choosing by morals and ethics that I don't agree in.
Well, so we had an episode where we discussed, and it was your story. We discussed how the spice company.
Yes.
There was a local spice company that was, I think that the values that they embodied and that they were very vocal about were on the liberal side of the political spectrum, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And it's very easy to take your point for people like me or you to applaud them for really standing up for those values, because if I recall correctly, we shared a lot of those values personally. But then I will tell you that when I hear about Hobby Lobby,
right,
on a very conservative part of the political spectrum, part of me is like, well, I will never shop in Hobby Lobby again. And why don't they just keep the politics out of this and just sell whatever they want to sell? But why is it that I feel like why do I have to go into those doors and feel like I'm supporting things that I don't really support?
See, there is where you conflate the two pieces that I was doing a very bad job of finding some metaphor for, which is the first thing you said, I will never take my business there. That is the appropriate part, like appropriate's not the right word. That's the part that I think should be the, like, if you use your business as a personal expression of your values, then you have to accept the fact that other people will vote with their feet on that. And that is the appropriate fallout and whatnot. I check myself I check in on myself if I want to make statements like businesses can or can't do X, Y, Z. If I have a different answer, if the sentence stays entirely the same and the only thing that swaps in the sentence is whether I agree with that moral or philosophical or ethical or political stance. If my answer switches whether a business can or should do a thing based on whether I agree with it or not. It reminds me of this meme thing I saw a couple of days ago that said, no one wants to hear your opinion. They want to hear their opinion come out of your mouth.
Right. And that's very often true. And I think I think that what you're talking about is a really good litmus test. Would I feel the same way and want to take the same action if the view expressed was something I agreed with as opposed to something I didn't?
But I do have to.
What I wanted to say, though, is that there are guardrails.
Yes.
Meaning that
that's exactly where I was going.
If somebody wants to say that they agree with a lot of the Trump administration's policies, whether it's environmental, whether it's judicial appointments, whether just pick a number of things. Okay, I don't, but that's still inside the guardrail of political discourse. So I disagree with people, and I have had people on my feed, for example, that said you should never do business with, and you should never even be friends with somebody who supports the Trump administration. I disagree with that. I disagree with painting everybody with that brush. And similarly, I have people on my feed and in my neighborhood who would think, no, everybody, they use the word libtard, and they are very dismissive of anybody who does not toe.
Which is doubly offensive, I just have to say, because
it's incredibly offensive
for so many reasons, doubly so.
But there are still guardrails. There's a great gap between my beliefs and the beliefs of many people in the neighborhood politically. However, outside of those guardrails, where I don't think the litmus test works, is something like the post I started the episode with.
Right. And I admittedly struggle to like produce a version of that that's on the opposite side. You know, like what is the extremely liberal version of something that would be that terrible?
Well, no, I think one of the extremely liberal versions could be, and I haven't seen this, but let's just say with the current everything going on now, if there were a post about the only good police officer is a dead police officer.
Perfect. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, that is that. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Exactly. So those are those guardrails. And that to me feels, actually, this is a point that I've thought of, something I've thought about creating, like kind of a diagram. I would hope, and this is not the case, but I think some people think those things outside the guardrails are fine. I think, though, that the vast majority of people would agree, at least somewhat, about everything outside the guardrails. You know, there comes a point where you get a really strong agreement about, like, oh, okay, that's too far, that's too much. Come on, you've got to be kidding me. The challenge, so that feels easier, but I don't think, and I'm not so naive as to imagine that there aren't tons and tons and far too many people who might think that post is perfectly fine. Like, that's, as well as the example you gave about dead police officers. But I think that's not the problem that is most often encountered by business owners. It's that everything inside those guardrails is not so clear. And so, like, where those lines are between my views and someone else's. I mean, it's funny that you brought this up, because I had a client this week get an incredibly angry voicemail left on their main voicemail system by someone who had read something that one of their employees, or so the lady thought, that's part of the punchline, had posted on social media that she thought was terribly racist, and she was super offended, and she wanted to know what they were going to do about it. And so,
but not on the company's official Twitter feed, not on behalf of the company itself.
No, and in fact, it's even a few steps more removed than that. This person, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns here that have not and probably aren't going to be answered, but that's part of the challenge. First of all, this person no longer works for them, hasn't worked for them for many years.
The person who allegedly posted this thing.
Correct. So this lady called in and said, you know, Bob Smith posted this thing. Well, Bob hasn't worked for them for, I think, at least 3 years. Okay. So lots of questions. I mean, they called her back, didn't get her live, but, you know, explained this person doesn't work for us. Where was it posted? What was said? What made you think that he worked for us? Like, did she do a Google search and that came up, or, right, or was it right there on the thing? Like, was he wearing a shirt? Like, how tied to them? Because they had all sorts of concerns. Are other people going to see this? Are people going to think he's representing us?
Sure.
They have not heard back from her, so they don't have a lot of facts to go on. We're not exactly clear what was said. We're not clear where it was. We're not clear how blatantly tied to their company he appears, or if it was more like a search she did elsewhere and then whatever. So, because every place that we can see his things, there is no post, and it's very clear that he doesn't work there anymore. So there's a lot of unknowns. That doesn't change the fact that they are concerned about that perception. The fact that one person could make that leap means other people could. So they called and made those things clear to her. They actually also reached out to the ex-employee to just say, hey, not sure what you posted, but if you did, and if it's a place where it ties you to us in some way, please, do a sweep of your things and make sure you were disconnected from us, because we want nothing to do with that. That's really all they can do. They don't have any authority over this person. He doesn't work for them.
Really.
This person claims, and who knows, he was kind of flabbergasted. He's like, I can't even imagine what that was. He's like, the only thing I can think of, and this is a thing that falls into that category. And this wasn't the thing. I unfortunately in this moment cannot remember what he said he had posted on a thing. He said, the only conversation I've had about race at all on any social platform, and this, like I said, this wasn't it, but it felt at about the level of that, where as if on a thread about Black Lives Matter, he had jumped in with all lives matter. Like, it's one of those things where I'm like, ugh, like, it's tiresome and it irritates the bejesus out of me. But it is, I sort of put it in that category of just like willful ignorance and refuse to like listen to the broader explanation. It's kind of like the kneeling thing. People who are like, you're kneeling against the flag. I'm like, literally every single thing has said that is not what we're doing. Interestingly, super quick side note. I saw a post from a guy and I just thought this was fascinating and didn't have the personal energy to devote to the post about this. But I saw a very long post from a conservative person who was upset and up in arms that the armed protests against the quarantine were so misunderstood. And it was a very well-written post. He's like, that's not what we're not protesting this. We're protesting government over. And it was very written out. And I thought, isn't it interesting how often people try to protest a thing to express a thing, and then everyone reacts and completely misses the point, and then the whole conversation has to be about that instead of something else. But anyway,
it's
side note.
We've talked about this a number of times, and we've labeled it kind of the death of nuance. But it's especially prevalent in protests because the rule book for protests says that you have to boil down your point onto a sign.
Right.
With very few words on it, right?
But fascinating.
You want to get the press coverage.
Yep.
You want to make sure people understand, but so often you can't use the sign for a well-reasoned rebuttal of the system that you're protesting against, or to address the common misperceptions of what you're trying to state.
Right.
You just have this one sign that's one
like
example.
The rain tax. Which is totally different, but like our governor of Maryland basically won on campaigning against the rain tax, and it wasn't a rain tax, but that's what they called it. And then
it's death panels.
Yeah.
It's, there are a lot of things, and even something like when you hear, and this is a whole different subject, so I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but when you hear defund the police, there's a lot of different layers to that. And
there are, and it's that one in particular, I think, is, not our. That's a whole other conversation of who gets to decide what a thing is called. But it doesn't change the fact that these things create. And wow, we have just gone off to a whole different topic here. But
it doesn't change the fact that there's a legitimate conversation over those things, whether it's the protests or the protests against the quarantine, et cetera.
Right.
Here, with the post with which I started the episode, I don't see, and this is the important part to me, I don't see that there is a legitimate conversation to be had about the validity of that post.
No.
And I also get to decide as a business owner if it's beyond those guardrails, if there's no legitimate conversation. And while I recognize, appreciate, and value diversity of thought, I get to be the arbiter and say, you know what, this is not acceptable here.
Right, which is the perfect thing. Where is your own line of the difference between diversity of thought and just unacceptable? I mean, I won't take us down a bunch of rabbit holes by naming some other things that I think would just be, pretty universally accepted as like, no, I'm not gonna defend, like, I'm not gonna entertain that. Because here's the other thing you do have to think about. I mean, yes, there's the constitutionality, which we covered, and yes, there are HR practices so that you protect yourself from being sued for things. But there's also just the reality that if it changed, and this doesn't fall into HR rules, because I know that it means you have, I don't know how to match this up with you have to treat people the same, because at the end of the day, if I'm going to look at that person differently and have a really hard time if I worked with that person, if that person worked for me, if I worked for that person, I would have a really hard time seeing anything but that post when I looked at that person. That's all I would see. And I'd be like, I don't know that I could get past that. And so if they were my employee, I have to recognize that might be a deal breaker, because I'm not going to be able to like have their career's best interest at heart.
No, well, that's true. I think that it's not so much treating everybody the same, because very often it's hard to find the same exact situations play out. What I think is important is applying the same standards.
Right. And I get that. I do think just one other thing I want to touch on, because we don't have a lot of time, but I do think it's, and this is a thing that I have very mixed feelings on, is it is the response for many before social media existed. I think the sort of perspective is, what you do in your own time is your own time. Like that's like you didn't necessarily, if for no other reason, you didn't necessarily see what people thought. Yes. I mean, the fact that was a shock of a statement to somebody means that person doesn't walk around the office saying those things. They don't post those things on their wall in the office. They come to work, they do their job, they go home, and you don't know what they do there. And so that is not the case anymore. And so we have line of sight to lots of things. And notwithstanding, if we pretend for a second that statement was not quite so over the guardrail of where I would like to hope the vast majority of people would disagree that that's an okay perspective. If it was just on this side of the guardrail statement, I get confused in my own head sometimes about how much, like if it was me and if it was a statement I believed in that was just on this side of that guardrail, like I have the luxury of, I don't work for a person who gets to decide whether I keep my job based on whether they agree with my stance on a thing. And so, yeah, it doesn't violate your constitutional rights, but it is a tricky thing of, I want to be able to post about what I believe in, and how that ties back to your work. I think it's a complicated thing. Like,
no, that, yes. The what I started the episode with is not complicated, but the issue it raises is.
Well, and that's the value of a not complicated version, because you can, that's why when a lot of times when something feels complicated in a decision, many times in one-on-one conversations, I do it on the podcast sometimes, certainly with my facilitations, I will take that example and make it an extreme version so that we can isolate the variables of one piece of it from kind of the other, like it's a way to isolate the variables of.
Well, that's what you do in law.
Oh,
that's what you do in law. You take an extreme and then you say, well, if the principle holds on the extreme, then let's start exploring the nuances.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that, just building on something you said, I really find myself sometimes longing for the day that I didn't know so much about the internally held views of so many people in my circle.
I have that thought, and then I instantly have the thought of how important it is that we are seeing those things, and then I hate that we do, and then I'm glad that we do, and then I hate that we do. And I don't land in one spot, because there's so much value in these things being surfaced, and wow, it's heavy and hard.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.